Good afternoon. My name is James Vann. I'm one of the attorneys here at Vann Attorneys, and we're really thankful that you have joined us today for our webinar. Just as a little bit of housekeeping before we get started, I want to say a big thank you to Michael Fernald, who works with us and helps us with our IT. He helps us with marketing, actually, and he helps us with these webinars. So Michael, he's participates with these in the background. And Michael, we really do appreciate your help. Appreciate your friendship, but also really do appreciate your help with these. Also, please mark your calendar for Thursday, March 9th at noon. We have an ACC lunch that we've hosted for a number of years, except for a couple recently during the pandemic issues. And this year we're going to reinstate that lunch. It's a sandwich of chicken salad, pimento cheese sandwiches, I think banana pudding, all kinds of really fun food to eat. And we use the ACC tournament as an excuse to get together. It'll be in our Raleigh office. Starts at noon. We'd love for you to come and grab a sandwich, meet friends, and have a great time. We will be sending out emails about that soon. I think hopefully some of you have already got some of that. Also, we have our next webinar on March 16th, and we hope you will participate with that webinar. If you have a topic that you really would love for us to cover, I would appreciate you sending us an email to that effect. That would be really helpful. And then last but not least in the announcements, we have a podcast, and I know a lot of you have subscribed to that podcast and have listened to the previous podcasts that we have recorded. I never thought we would be doing that. This year, we actually have a fairly impressive, I should say not fairly, a very impressive list of people that we are interviewing and talking with. So you'll be seeing those come out soon. But if you haven't already subscribed or started listening, I would encourage you to do that. I hope it's something that will be helpful to you. You can do that, obviously, wherever you like to do that, in the car or wherever. A little more housekeeping. If you have a question, you can use the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen, or send us an email at webinar@vanattorneys.com, and we'll do our best to answer those questions while we're together. So let's look at this today. We're going to be talking about legal tips for collecting accounts receivable in the 2023 economy. So let's look at some of those topics that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking a little bit of the economy. I'm not an economist. I just know about what I read, talking to other folks. I've talked to some other clients and other companies about what they're doing differently today in preparation for 23 and maybe 24. And then what about real estate issues across the state of North Carolina? As you know, we're licensed to practice law in the state of North Carolina, and all of our issues that we talk about have to do with North Carolina law. So we'll look at those issues, and then after that, some follow-up tips. So a few observations on some real estate in North Carolina. Obviously, available housing inventory seems to be dropping. That's not as much of an issue as it used to be. Some say the housing market is starting to settle down a little bit. The feeding frenzy, at least in the larger areas, is not quite as much of a craziness as it was back maybe last year and the year before that. Mortgage rates have more than doubled since 21. That has slowed things down a little bit. I actually talked to a guy yesterday who is a builder, and he was saying that there was a large tract builder that had just taken a fairly large number of lots in Wilson, North Carolina. And I know we have somebody listening today from Wilson. That's a great community. Love that community so much, and they are really starting to pick up. And the things that we're seeing is that the communities outside of, say, Raleigh, Charlotte, maybe Greensboro, those towns, the smaller towns that had not really gained much economic leverage, starting to pick up a little bit, which is really good. The active listings with MLS has doubled, which shows again that the market is getting bigger. The houses are not moving quite as fast. The number of showings per house are down from 2022. Again, that's the last part of 22 and then heading into 23. So not real sure how much information that's really helpful yet, but that's what the stats are showing us. prices in the North Carolina metro areas are expected to maintain current levels. They're just not driving up as fast as they were in 22, because quite frankly, that's going to get out of control. I mean, it's already somewhat out of control, but it's going to get really worse if that doesn't settle down a little bit. Most folks say that there seems to still be a seller's market, real estate wise, in North Carolina for the most part. And, folks are moving to North Carolina from all over the country, which is a really interesting dynamic to deal with. And in number 8, some large national builders have backed off from new projects. I had heard, at least in 22, that some of the larger tract builders and national builders were not taking lots as much as they were earlier. But again, as I had heard yesterday, this national tract builder had taken a fairly large tract of land and lots in Wilson. So that's sort of interesting, right? Just some observations, right? And in talking with a few businesses recently, there's a supplier of cabinets that I was talking with, and they have seen confirmed orders for 24 significantly lower than in the last few years. And they book out business so far in advance. Still, they're waiting to see what 24 is going to look like. But even as of now, I should say at the end of 22, their 24 orders were pretty significantly lower than what they had been. I spoke with another supplier who sees cash flow for customers slowing down. Their AR is starting to tick up a little bit. They're monitoring their AR with greater scrutiny, but they were saying that their customers are just not paying as quickly as they had been, and they were having more conversations. Not a problem, right? Just having more conversations. Number 3, there were some orders for another company that has slowed, and they're opening up for new customers. So when I was talking to this client, they were saying that they had gotten to the point where they couldn't even take new clients, new customers, and that they had opened up the door to accept new customers now because they were a little bit worried about what 24 was going to look like. And at least from our perspective, the claim of lien claims, at least in North Carolina, over the last 4 months, seems to be increasing. We've seen an increase with our clients. We've had actually a fairly large number of new clients reach out to us in the last 3 months with lien claims. Again, something that's sort of interesting, and I think overall lien claims are still way down than they were right before, maybe early part of the pandemic. But the last couple of years, it's been sort of moderately paced as far as claim of liens go across the state. But I think that's starting to tick up a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see what the rest of this year, what that brings, right? So a few statistics to consider, right? Bankruptcy filings nationwide had an increase of about 6% from 21 to 22. I will say this, as I was looking at these stats, the increase had a lot to do with the crypto issues at the end of the year. There was a large number of filings with that. That actually ticked it up a little bit larger, more so than the 6%. But it's about a 6% increase overall. North Carolina, not as much, but over nationwide. Certainly a slowing U.S. economy. I keep hearing that, but I hear that in one story. The next story I hear, I think they said the sales for December were still up and increased, but were not as much as they thought they would be. So you take all that in consideration. Certainly the cost to borrow money has increased, monetary tightening by banks. We've spoken with a fair number of banks for our clients, and there's certain a change in how the banks are lending and where they're lending and what type of projects they're lending to. There's been a tightening there, and a much higher scrutiny going probably in 22, 23, certainly going forward. What will be the impact of inflation? I don't really know. We're also, I think, trying to wait to see what that looks like. I went to a economic session with this guy who's really, really smart. I understood just a little bit of what he said. And he's expecting the first quarter to the first half of the second quarter to when it starts to show up. I don't know if that's realistic or not, right? We'll see. Sort of like telling forecasting the weather. Don't really know. And then certainly the global economy and what those issues may be for us. Hopefully, and I'm talking with a lot of our clients, it seems like the supply chain has gotten more stable, right? Hopefully that won't be an issue for us. Just some things to think about, right? 23 will be an interesting year. I don't think it's going to, I hope it's not going to be a economic difficult time for people, of course, but it's one of those things I think we all are looking at and trying to measure. Just some proactive steps for you, right? These are things that we've talked about in the past, some, but we also want to just encourage you, right? Make sure your customer knows and understands the terms of credit, right? When are the due dates? When are the payment schedules? How does that work? Is there finance charges to be assessed? And if so, when would that be assessed? So if you're bringing in new customers, right, you want to make sure that they understand that. And maybe even for some existing customers who just thankfully had cash flow on a regular basis that may be struggling at this point, right, to make sure they understand what that looks like from a standpoint of what your expectations are for payment. Send accurate invoices and to do that promptly. And I think most everybody we know, at least that I know that's on this call, has that set up. So that's a fairly systematic way of making sure that gets done. And I think the biggest part is making sure that your team has the accurate billing that's going out on a regular basis to make sure that's correct, right? Because then it comes up to be the cleanup part of it is a whole lot harder, and it just takes longer, right, to do that. And then review aging reports routinely. And I know most of y'all probably do that. I'm saying this to you to encourage you, not to browbeat you by any means, but just look at that and routinely, right? Act quickly on the late notices or the invoices, right? Are you making phone calls? Are you doing the emails? I know some of you text with your customers. Certainly letters, thankfully, still are in play. And it's basically however you can communicate or how your customer wants to communicate with you. I actually talked to a debtor today that had been ignoring phone calls and communications from our client. You know, we mail a demand letter to them, and we thankfully got their attention. And that we hope that that's going to happen from a standpoint of getting them paid. So letters thankfully still do matter, and they still have some effect, which is really good. Also, I mean, think about this, right? If your customer can't pay you what they owe, what's the payment plan process look like? Do you do a payment plan, or do you just turn around and sue them, right? Obviously, if you can do a payment plan and get through that and not lose any significant issues due to the time, that's obviously probably to your advantage. We've talked about promissory notes in the past, right? So think about this. If you've got a contract, right? If you've got a written contract with your customer, whether it's paper or it's electronic, either way, it's a contract, right? Hopefully. If you have that contract, it's already a promise to pay, right? They've promised to pay you based upon your terms. So my question would be this: do you want to take a promissory note, which is an additional promise to pay, which you already have? It really doesn't, unless something's wrong with your contract. It really doesn't. The promissory note doesn't really get you anything other than a payment date and hopefully an end date as to when they're going to pay that through, right? It just puts it in writing. You don't have any additional protection from a legal standpoint. There is certainly an argument to say that it's harder to defend a promissory note in court than it would be, say, an open account if you've got a contract, credit application. But even then, and I don't really think it gets you a whole lot. But having a confession of judgment with a payment schedule, I would say gets you a lot better protection going forward. And a lot of times, I know a lot of you will draft up a confession for you. Your customer signs it with a payment schedule, very much like a prom note. And if they don't pay, then you take that confession. You can take the confession and go file it, right? You could still file a confession immediately, but most people say, I'd rather you not file a confession of judgment with the clerk's office unless I default. That's typically how those things work. So again, that gets you further down the road. You don't have to file a lawsuit because you're to have the confession at that point. If they don't pay you, and they default on the confession of judgment and the payment schedule, then you already have a judgment. So you've saved a lot of time for yourself, the attorney's fees, you've saved on court time, right? The whole process. And then the other thing I want to get you to think about is if you have to get security. Let's just say your customer owes you a lot of money and you don't feel comfortable that they can follow through on the payment schedule. You want to get some security. Real estate is a great security to have, right? You also want to know who's ahead of you and how much they're owed, so you make sure there is equity on the property. But at the same time, I would encourage you, if you can get some kind of security, to do that. Taking vehicles, it's an okay thing to do, but vehicles move. Their value changes pretty quickly, right? If there's an accident, if they're stolen, and we find this, we haven't over the years, not the last probably 3 years. Sometimes people will hide those assets. You can't find the car, right? Or the truck, whatever it may be. So I really would encourage you, if you could get security and need it, let's get the real estate if we can. If not, let's get the title to the vehicles. And I will say this to you, right? If you're thinking about if you're going to get a vehicle title or equipment title to have a lien on, right? On the back of the title, the customer, signs to give you a lien, right? And a lot of times our clients used to take the actual physical paper of the title to the vehicle, and they would just put it in their vault or put it somewhere safe. But they would never turn that into the DMV for them to be registered as a lien holder on that vehicle. Well, let me just tell you, if something happens to that vehicle, you're not a lien holder. You may have the paper title, but you're not a lien holder. Or the customer could then go back to the DMV and ask for a duplicate title, and you're still sitting holding the original one, right? That has you listed on the back, which if you never submitted it to the DMV, they don't know that you exist. And therefore, DMV sends a new title to your customer. Customer then takes the equipment, sells it, transfers it on the back of the title, and it's gone. And you don't have anything. So I would really encourage you, if you're going to take a title to a vehicle, don't hold it without submitting it to the DMV to show up as a lien holder. If you have any questions about that, let me know. I know that's a lot of information, but if that doesn't make sense, call me or email. I'd be glad to help you. So just a few more ideas on proactive follow-up. Make sure to follow up with your collections in a timely manner. And you're supposed to hopefully are knowing what's going on with your accounts, 30, 60, 90 days. And I know y'all are looking at that. I know you are. And I'm saying this as an encouragement to make sure that your team knows what's happening, right? Does someone else need to call them just to have another follow-up? If they're not following up with you, or if the customer just is ignoring the communication that you're sending for whatever reason, make sure you know what's happening to the account. And oftentimes, short-term follow-ups like an email or text or a phone call, something is really helpful to keep that slow-paying customer on task, right? If let's just say they have a payment due on the 25th, right? Sending them a message on the 20th or 22nd or something like that, 23rd, hey, looking forward to getting your payment on the 25th. That helps, right? That they know you're there, they know you're expecting it, and hopefully they follow through with that. And then the other thing I ask, a lot of times I ask when I talk to our clients is like, hey, well, what's going on with the customer? Hopefully you know what's going on with those slow pay customers, right? If something has changed in how they're paying, I'm hoping that you understand what's going on in their business, right? Is there a cash flow issue because sales are down? Have they had 1 or 2 jobs or something that's projects that have really messed them up, right? Do they have customers that haven't paid them or someone that's filed bankruptcy? We have a client that we're helping, and they have one of their customers, a really big customer, filed bankruptcy very unexpectedly. It caught everybody off guard. And that has disrupted the business, right? They're going to be fine. Our client's going to be fine getting through it, but that was a big number. So just understanding what's going on with your customer helps you understand what's going to happen with your cash flow, at least from their AR standpoint. And then number 9, avoid operating out of fear. And I know most of you don't do that, right? Be prepared. Hopefully there are no surprises, right? Birthdays is about we want to be for surprises for, right? We really don't want to have surprises for anything other than birthday celebration stuff. And then use your resources, right? People that you know, right? Other vendors that are in your business that may know this customer. If you've asked for credit references, right, talk to them. Looking at DMV records or looking at other public records to tell you what's going on with your customer. Talking to your attorney, right? Hopefully, a lot of times, we get phone calls. Hey, James, have you ever heard of X, Y, and Z? Yep, heard of them, right? We've sued them 3 times. Just that kind of, right? You just never know. Ask the sales staff, right? The sales staff a lot of times knows what's going on because they're out in the market. They see people, they hear things. And I remember not too long ago we had a client who, when we were talking to them, I said, "What's going on?" They're like, "Well, sales said they're selling all their vehicles." I'm like, "That's not a good idea, right? Something's going on, right? If that's happening." So again, use your resources to keep up with what's happening with your customer. Some additional tips: avoid deceptive text, emails, communications. I know y'all know that, and I don't think you do it, but really think about what you're putting in your communication. Right? Always be truthful. Be careful what you say or write. But honesty and truth is a great thing. So stick to those things. Identify yourself truthfully as to who you are, what you're calling for. If you're leaving a message, I would say make it very vague, right? You don't want to leave a lot of messages. You might want to say, "Hey, I'm James Vann. I'm calling from Vann Attorneys. I'm calling about your open account. If you would give me a call, please," and leave your number. You don't want to go into, "You owe me X number of dollars and you haven't paid me in 6 months," because you never know who's going to hear that message. And if you're like I am, you call numbers now and there's no message at all, right? It's just the beep. Well, you better hope you got the right number. So again, avoid leaving great detail. Don't reveal the debt or debtor information to third parties. Obviously, I know y'all know that. Don't threaten criminal prosecution with civil gain. And what that means is, hey, if you don't pay me, especially for that return check or that bounce check, we're gonna prosecute you criminally. That's threatening criminal prosecution for civil gain. What you can say is, if you don't pay us fully for that return check, then we're gonna pursue all avenues, which could be civil and criminal prosecution if you don't pay us. Now, I basically said the same thing. I just didn't threaten criminal prosecution for civil gain. And let me also mention this to you. If you get a check, right, and let's just say it's $10,000, customer says, "Oh, I'm so sorry that, whatever reason that happened, I'll pay you 5 right now and the other 5 in a week." Don't accept that, because what happens is if you accept a partial payment on a return check, the return check from a criminal prosecution goes away. You cannot use that anymore. So again, if they are trying to make a partial payment for a return check, do not accept it. Ask for all of it. So I hope that makes sense. Contact your customer, obviously, as soon as the account is past due. Stick to the facts and the details, right? You avoid the emotional phone calls with the customer. And I know a lot of you know your customers well, right? You know what's going on in their family, you know what's going on in the community. And that's not to say that you're not obviously emotionally tied into them, but this is business. It's not personal, right? I talked to a guy today, and I think our client is online with us today. And this person owed our client a lot of money, several $100,000. And the debtor told me, he's like, I was really shocked to get a demand letter from your office for your client, because I've paid them thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last couple of years. And I'm like, yeah, you did, because you received hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of material. That's why you paid them, right? Don't let it get emotional. Stay out of the emotion. Keep it business. It's not personal. And one of the greatest lines I think I ever heard was, "Hey, this is a business call. This is not personal, but I need to collect these dollars, right? You need to pay this, and we need to get this taken care of." Great way just to say, "Look, I hear you. I'm sorry, but this is business." Make sure that it's easy for your customers to pay, and I know y'all do that, and you're trying very hard to make it easy for your customers to pay. There's all kinds of payment opportunities today, right? Through credit card or other ways. Follow up with a customer when the payments are promised, right? And That way, you know that, when they, for example, you follow up, and when they say, I'm gonna make a payment, you just follow up with them and, get the details, how are you gonna pay it, when you're gonna pay it, how much, and so forth. We've got some sample calls in here, and I'm not going to go through that with you today through the webinar, but if you've got the handout, it'll help you just a little bit, right? That some phrases that might be able to help. Again, when you're reaching out to them, make sure that you are thinking about what you're saying and portraying to them, right? Be prepared for the specific and the general excuses, right? The check's in the mail. We've all heard that. Okay, great. Give me the check number. How much is it? When did you write it, right? When did you mail it? I've had that conversation with hundreds of debtors, and it's really interesting. Some can tell you that right off the top of their head, right? And you're okay, they're probably telling the truth. And others, not so much, right? You can tell when they're not being honest. Or if they say, I have a cash flow problem right now. Great, I understand, I hear that. Can we set up a payment plan? Tell me why you're having a cash flow problem. What's going on? Or I've not received the invoice yet. Oh, hold on, no problem. I'm going to email it to you while we're on the phone, right? And I love that piece of it. It's an easy one to take care of that. Know the facts of the account, right? When you're calling, think positive and be positive. I've looked at the list who's on today, and I know a lot of you, and I know that's how you approach those phone calls. There was a friend of mine who used to be a credit manager, and this person has retired, but I think this person had stayed in the business too long and was just absolutely sour, right? And I say that they're a friend of mine, but they should have retired probably a few years earlier because they just got bent and they were tired, right? And weren't always very positive. Be positive, right? And I would encourage you this: don't let what you do take years off of your life, right? You have a job, do your job. It's business. It's not personal. And then that way it doesn't bother you when you go home, right? Some other tips: speak with authority and professionally, right? Know your audience, know who you're talking with. I think calling them by their name helps so often, right? Listen carefully and take notes so you can follow back up with that if you need to. And then try to get an agreement with specifics as to payments, when it's going to be. I don't know if y'all are using video conferencing much with your customers, but it is so much easier now to set those up, right? With so many different tools that probably you all have. And most people can do it now with their cell phone, right? Or if they're in the office, they have the internet connection. It's easy to do. And the reason I like that is that you get to see eyeballs, right? You get to talk with people. You may not be face to face in person, but at least you can tell a lot of times what's going on with them individually, right? If they're being honest with you. So I would encourage you to add that to your list. Again, if y'all have got questions, please feel free to submit them to us. I don't think any questions have come in today, but if you've got questions, you can either email them to us or call us. We'll be glad to help you. We are really thankful that you have participated with us today. We hope that you will continue to do that. And if you've got a topic that you want us to cover for next month, please send that to us. We thank you for letting us be a provider to you, and we hope you have a great day. Thank you so much.